Hi everybody, welcome to Afterburner. I'm Bill Whittle. 2 weeks ago, I stood on the same spot and told the class of 2015 that if they did not wake up to the fact that this weakness in the face of Islamic murder was going to lead us to ISIS coming here to America, coming and trying to kill us all. 9 days later, ISIS came to an event in Garland, Texas, and tried to kill us all. They tried to kill all of us. Do you understand? All of us. Not just the people brave enough to make a point about the murderous intolerance of these murdering savages. Because despite what the left would dearly love for you to believe, they didn't come here to kill conservatives. They came to kill the people who wanted to speak their mind and hold an opinion that they found offensive. You know, the kind of things that progressives and conservatives alike do every day. And if you're one of the millions of two-legged sheep that have any sympathy for these wolves, let me just make this perfectly clear to you. If you think Pam Geller and the organizers of that event somehow deserve to die for expressing their opinion, well, that's no different than saying that Andre Serrano deserves to die for his incredibly provocative and offensive work called Piss Christ, a photograph of a crucifix in a jar of urine. He deserves to die for that work by that same standard. If you think the event organizers in Garland were asking for it by being provocative and offensive, then you believe that Michael Moore deserves to be shot dead for deliberately provoking and offending conservatives. You believe that Jon Stewart and the entire staff of The Daily Show need to be chalk outlines on a bloody stage floor for being provocative and offensive. And by agreeing that the Muslim savages who thought that drawing a cartoon in Texas was deserving of the death penalty by being provocative and offensive, then you agree with these same people and that same logic when they rape blonde women in Norway for wearing what was to them the provocative and offensive act of appearing in public in a miniskirt. You know, she was just asking for it. If she didn't want to get raped, she should have worn a burqa. That's your position. You know, there's a word for this, and it's not tolerance, and it's not enlightenment, or fairness, or wisdom, any of those fig leaves. There is one thing that drives this phenomenon, this somehow explaining or even mitigating the actions of murderers who want to respond to cartoons with bullets. And that word is simple, unadorned, unrefined cowardice. Cowardice. The kind of museum-grade cowardice shown recently by Gary Trudeau, who said that the massacre of cartoonists at the Charlie Hebdo office in France was, well, regrettable. Somehow justified because they were picking on a downtrodden, ostracized class. The mass murder of cartoonists blithely and cleverly explained away by a cartoonist. You know, Gary Trudeau is a multimillionaire who has a house on his own little island in Connecticut. Millions of small, average Americans find what he writes to be provocative and insulting every single day. I wonder if Gary thinks it's okay if someday they give him what he deserves for being provocative and offensive. You know, progressives support Andre Serrano's right to be insulting and provocative, and Michael Moore and Jon Stewart and Gary Trudeau's, they fight for their right to be provocative and insulting, but not for any belief in the actual principles of free speech, because that would take courage. Now, they support their fellow progressives' right to provoke and insult conservatives and Christians because they know nothing is going to happen to them if they do. But insult the prophet, well, that these days has consequences. And that, of course, is the entire point, right? These radical Muslims smelled the fear coming out of these New York skyscrapers and thought that that stench covered the entire country. 2 of them discovered that in parts of Texas anyway, the air is still fit to breathe. Now, you see this? This is a bell curve. It's one of nature's hidden laws, this funny squiggle, because it determines, among other things, how attributes are distributed across a population. For example, if we're talking about height, there are very few people over 7 feet at the tall end of the curve, very few people under 5 feet at the other end, and right there in the center of this giant bulge is the average American male height of 5 feet 9.5 inches. This bell curve can be applied to height or weight or speed or intelligence, and it can also be applied to cowardice. I've spent the last year studying in great detail the effects of fear on a population. The random arrests, torture, and executions of the Cheka, later the NKVD in the Soviet Union, created such an environment of universal terror that people would do whatever, and I mean anything whatsoever. They'd sell out their wives, their children. They'd praise Stalin as they were being shot in the back of the head in his name. They would do whatever the wielders of that terror wanted them to do. And long before the dreaded murderers of the SS took over the terror machine in Germany, the SA, the brown-shirted stormtroopers of the National Socialist German Workers' Party, well, they weren't murderers. Well, most of them weren't anyway. So what were they? Well, they're just thugs. They were a private army of thugs that tore down opposition posters, threw beer mugs, and mostly beat up their political opponents, namely communists, supporters of the democratic Weimar Republic, homosexuals, and of course, the Jews. The Jews had been physically beaten and intimidated for 20 years before the cattle cars to Auschwitz and Treblinka opened their doors. Now, this bell curve can also be a bell curve of fear. Right here on the leading edge are those people who speak their minds for a living and then, out of fear, say things like, well, they crossed the line, or I support free speech, but. There is no line. There is no but. Speech is either free, you can say what you want without being murdered for it, or you can't. You're not 60% dead and you're not a little bit pregnant. Speech is either free or it isn't. So we can fight the people who want to murder us for our speech, who, when you get right down to brass tacks, really want to murder us for our thoughts. And we can also fight those who apologize for them out of a vague, unfocused fear and cowardice. And we can fight them now, while we're still at the leading edge of the bell curve of cowardice, where cowardice lives mostly in New York skyscrapers and not in the heart of a Texas policeman with a pistol. Or we can do nothing and let the fear grow and be more careful and bow our heads and our minds until the fat part of the snake is among us and everyone is living in fear and everyone watches what they say. And we all wonder if the next line out of our mouths will offend and provoke someone into murdering us in cold blood, while the rest of the cowards applaud and cheer with sweat running down their brows as they did in Soviet Russia and Nazi Germany. Stating in clear and forceful terms to these 7th century savages that here in America, I'm going to do and say whatever I damn well please is not Islamophobia. Islamophobia is a reflective shield. It's rhetoric in a brown shirt. It is, in the widely misattributed words of Andrew Cummins, a word created by fascists and used by cowards to manipulate morons. If you think that the event in Garland, Texas was in any way justified because it was Islamophobic, then which one are you? Are you the fascist, or the coward, or the moron? Maybe you're all three.